Among them, an elderly butler had stepped forward to greet him with a formal welcome. The butler, whose name had been known as Ethan, had offered a respectful bow, but then, his eyes had landed on Lyncher. A shadow of concern had passed over his face. The presence of Lyncher had drawn the attention of every servant present. Murmurs had begun to rise quietly among them. Ethan had addressed Kendrick in a low, respectful voice, questioning the meaning behind the girl's arrival. Kendrick, however, had not offered a lengthy explanation. Lyncher had been passed into Ethan's hands with simple instructions: she was to be taken care of. It had been pointed out that she did not appear to possess the means to defend herself. Orders had been given for her to be washed, fed, and nourished. Her thinness had been noted with concern. Without further discussion, Kendrick had turned and entered the palace. It had felt like abandonment to Lyncher. Cold and immediate. Ethan, meanwhile, had passed Lyncher to a pair of nearby servants and instructed them to watch over her temporarily. He had then excused himself and hurried inside, clearly intending to follow Kendrick. Inside the palace walls, the conversation had resumed. Ethan had requested a moment of Kendrick's time and had followed him into a private chamber. There, concern had been voiced with firm conviction. It had been said that the young bird Kendrick had brought home was none other than the daughter of the Raniero clan. The implication had been made clear: if she had parents and a family, then this act might very well be seen as an abduction. The truth behind her presence had been demanded. Had force been used? Had threats been made? And even if she had come willingly, it had been argued that she should not be left with someone like Dagon, especially without clarity. In response, a folded note had been presented to Ethan by Kendrick. It had been the same letter Lyncher had written, pleading to be taken with him to Eckhart. After reading it, Ethan had asked whether her request had been understood. Kendrick had admitted that due to her beast form, her words had not been clear. A mistake had been acknowledged: perhaps he should have clarified her intentions before bringing her here. But then, Kendrick had asked in return, how would that have been possible when her mouth could not form human speech? Ethan had voiced one last concern. It had been feared by him that interrogation might drive the girl to flee. Responsibility had been questioned: would Kendrick take the blame? But Kendrick had waved off the concern. It had been claimed that even if she turned out to be a spy, the situation would remain advantageous. The daughter of Raniero was now in their possession. Until her power faded, she would be treated well. An order had been issued: hourly reports on her condition were to be submitted. As Ethan had left, Kendrick had seated himself, closing his eyes. Thoughts had begun to swirl. The little bird from Raniero had been stronger than expected. Even in her cursed form, a power had been sensed. Perhaps she held the key to healing the child. Time would be taken. Her transformation would not be rushed. When her human form returned, her reasons would be heard. For now, she would be fed, comforted, and gently persuaded to remain. In time, she would become his daughter-in-law. Elsewhere, Lyncher had felt a strange sensation. As though her name had been spoken from afar. Moments later, Ethan had approached once more. He had gently addressed her, confirming her identity as a member of the Raniero clan. Recognition had flashed in Lyncher's mind. This had been the same man to whom Kendrick had entrusted her. As she had been carried by Ethan, a question had been asked softly. Concern had been expressed: had she been brought here against her will? She had quickly shaken her head in refusal. Relief had crossed Ethan's features. It had been admitted by him that a fear had lingered, that force might have been used once again. Lyncher had reflected quietly. The Kendrick of her past life had been terrifying. It had been difficult to imagine what he might have been like as a child. Perhaps he had been just as arrogant as the other noble children. Perhaps worse. The hallway had extended before them until a chamber door had come into view. With a respectful nod, Ethan had announced that the room was now hers. Her gaze taking in the magnificence of the space. The room into which she had entered was not just large, it was vast and exquisitely designed. Every corner of it spoke of elegance and careful attention to detail. Its beauty was breathtaking, and Lyncher, caught off guard by such grandeur, could hardly believe that it had been meant for her. It had been wondered silently by her whether the room was truly hers. The thought felt unreal. Every item in the room, each piece of furniture, each drape, every polished surface, seemed too luxurious to belong to someone like her. The cushions looked plush, the sheets appeared to be spun from the finest fabric, and the wooden carvings on the bedposts looked as though they had been crafted by the most talented artisans. The disbelief had settled in her mind. Never before had she imagined that she would live in such a place. As she stood there, captivated, Ethan had informed her gently that this room had been arranged as her new quarters. From that moment forward, she had been told, she would be staying there. And if she happened to need anything at all, he had mentioned that she should feel free to say so. Orders could be given for someone to travel down to the nearby village to fetch any supplies she might require. Internally, it had been thought by Linsher that the current provisions were already far more than sufficient. She had no desire for anything else. Gratitude filled her chest, yet she also felt a twinge of unease at being offered such generosity so freely. A warning had then been issued by Ethan in a casual but caring tone. It had been suggested that she should avoid burrowing beneath the blankets without caution. His concern, subtle though it was, had not gone unnoticed. He had then turned to one of the maids and instructed her to begin by replacing the bedding, ensuring that it would be more suitable and breathable, allowing Linsher to sleep more comfortably that night. A question had been posed to her after that, whether anything else was causing discomfort or unease. The question had stirred her thoughts. Hunger, which had been ignored until that moment, now made itself known. She recalled that the cookies given by Adele had been left uneaten in the rush of her departure. Her stomach had been empty since then. An attempt had been made by Linsher to subtly convey her hunger without directly saying it. Fortunately, her signals had been interpreted correctly by Ethan. A warm smile had touched his face, and he had mentioned that food would be brought to her immediately. Following his words, the servants had set into motion. The thick blanket had been removed, and a lighter one had been laid out. A full meal had been prepared and brought into her room without delay. Even a bath, warm, aromatic, and soothing, had been offered to her. Linsher had found herself overwhelmed again. This time, however, it had been by comfort rather than shock. Everything had been managed perfectly. Nothing had been neglected. And all of this had been made possible because the wolves had carried out Kendrick's orders faithfully. A soft realization had come over Linsher. A kind of comfort she had never known was being granted to her now, in this mansion, by those who should have been her enemies. The stark contrast to her life in the Raniero household had not gone unnoticed. She had thought to herself that perhaps now, with time to breathe, it was the right moment to go over her plan again, to reaffirm her purpose. The first part of her plan had already been executed successfully. She had arrived at the Wolf mansion, just as she had intended. The next step was clear: marriage to Arson. If the marriage could be secured, her place in the mansion would be solidified. She would not be cast aside before reaching maturity. This was not about love, it was survival. However, a complication had been acknowledged by her. The nature of wolves and their traditions made the situation delicate. In the wolf clan, it was known that a mate was chosen only once. The commitment, once made, could not be undone. It was a lifelong bond, final and absolute. A question had risen in her heart. Was she truly prepared to tie her life to the heir of the Eckhart family? Her heart had answered clearly, no. But she had reassured herself that since the marriage would be contractual and not emotional, a path to separation would remain. It had been believed by her that if a person were married off young and without consent, then once they came of age, they would be offered the option of divorce. For this reason, the marriage had not frightened her. In truth, it had seemed like a beneficial arrangement for both parties. The Wolf clan had been in urgent need of their heir's recovery. The marriage might provide emotional or spiritual support. Yet, before she could discuss anything of that nature, her form would have to change back. The beast form she still wore would have to be discarded. Yet, in her heart, she had admitted that the idea of transforming back made her strangely reluctant. An inner conflict had begun to surface. Was it truly acceptable for her to enjoy these luxuries while being so deeply entwined in a plan? Should she not be doing more, training, offering help, or proving herself? Thus far, she had merely eaten delicious food and taken a luxurious bath. She had questioned whether her value had been underestimated, or whether it had simply been decided that she was to be pampered regardless of her origin. After all, she was a daughter of their rival family. And yet, she had been treated not as an outsider, but as an honored guest. Later that night, one of the maids had approached her again. It had been observed that Lyncher must have been exhausted from her long journey. Now that her fur had dried completely, it had been suggested that her bed be prepared once more for rest. Lyncher had thought that the kindness being shown to her was unfamiliar, yet comforting. In her previous household, such care had only ever been offered by Adele. The lights were soon turned off by the maids after bidding her good night. This sudden plunge into darkness had left Lyncher startled. Fear crept in slowly. She had realized that all the lighting in the mansion was powered by magic. When one light was turned off, the others vanished with it. A sense of abandonment had taken over her. She had thought that she had been left all alone. That moment had triggered a memory from a past life. A room without light. A younger version of herself, left in silence and shadows. She could not bear it. Tears had welled up as she rushed toward the maids. Her fear had been understood instantly. The lights had been turned on once more. Water had been brought for her, and comforting words had been spoken. It had been admitted internally by Lyncher that her fear of the dark was now undeniable. What she had experienced in Kendrick's pocket earlier had not been merely physical discomfort. It had been darkness, true, suffocating darkness, that she feared. And in that moment, she had realized that this fear had not existed in her previous life. A promise had then been made by one of the maids. In the future, the lights would not be turned off without first asking her permission. Another maid had offered to stay with her if she so desired. That offer, though kindly meant, had been declined silently by Lyncher. It had been considered that she feared the darkness, not solitude. And besides, they were wolves, she still needed time. Eventually, sleep had come to her, and the night passed quietly. The next morning, Kendrick Eckhart had arrived at her door. He had asked whether she liked the room. It had been admitted by him that the preparations were made in haste, and he was unsure if it was truly to her taste. A request had then been made to her. She was asked whether she would be willing to meet his son that evening during dinner. Her eyes had widened. The name Arson had echoed in her mind. It had been realized by her, then, at last, the moment of meeting him had arrived.
I feel like the real story will just start when she meets his son, and don't forget, he would be her future husband. Let's see how their meeting will go in the next part. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.